This line is for military only. Step aside, ma'am." She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply stepped back and waited. But the air shifted. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Whispers turned to laughter. And within minutes, she wasn't just ignored, she was mocked. Then came the voice, calm, authoritative, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Corporal, that woman commanded my entire battalion in Kandahar. If anyone belongs here, it's her." But the damage was already done. The stares, the doubts, the blind certainty that veterans only look a certain way. They had no idea what kind of silence they were provoking. And what happens next will rewrite everything they thought they knew about honor, memory, and command. Tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to Veteran Biker for more stories that hit harder than any headline. A new one drops tomorrow. Don't miss it. The first thing she noticed was the smell, cleaner and copper, the unmistakable scent of a military hospital that hadn't changed since her first visit decades ago. Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes stepped through the automatic glass doors with the quiet precision of someone who didn't need to be noticed to take up space. She wasn't here to reminisce. Her shoulder had been acting up again. Nerve damage from a landing that didn't go according to plan, and today was her scheduled follow-up at Andrews Military Medical Center. She had the appointment slip printed, folded, and carried in her inside jacket pocket, just in case. The waiting area for former service members was separated from the general clinic. Just a different hallway, a different reception desk, but enough of a line to draw invisible walls between the two worlds. Evelyn moved toward the desk marked Military Priority Admissions, where a short line had already formed. Most were younger men in pressed polos and tactical watches, a few with service dogs, all with confident strides. She took her place at the end, silent, steady. Ahead, a young corporal stood guard by the velvet rope divider, checking IDs. His uniform was immaculate, creased perfectly, nameplate polished. Evelyn had seen hundreds like him over her career. She didn't resent him. He was doing his job. But when her turn came, his expression flickered. "Ma'am," he said, with the kind of overly polite tone that always came before a problem, "this line is for military personnel only." Evelyn met his eyes, calm. "I know. I'm here for a follow-up. I've got the appointment sheet and my VA card." She reached into her jacket and handed him both. He glanced at the card, then turned it over, then squinted at it as if expecting a hologram to prove her claim. "This is an old version," he said slowly. "We're using the updated system now. Do you have a current CAC?" "No," she said simply. "I retired in 2012. Before the transition," the corporal's polite smile flattened. "Unfortunately, without a valid CAC or updated VA credential, I can't allow you to proceed in the priority line." A beat passed. Evelyn nodded once, pocketed her card, and took a small step back. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She moved as if the air hadn't shifted at all, even though the people behind her had gone quiet. The woman directly behind her leaned sideways and said, not quite under her breath, "Some people just want to feel important." A couple of men further back exchanged glances. One chuckled softly. Evelyn turned and walked toward the general admissions side of the room. The line was longer, the chairs more cramped, the pace slower. She didn't mind. She had waited for evac under fire. She could wait for a shoulder exam. But as she passed by the outer edge of the priority zone, her voice, brief, low, and precise, slipped out as she thanked a nurse moving equipment out of her way. "Appreciate it, ma'am," she said, with the crisp cadence of someone trained to speak clearly under pressure. And that's when it happened. Behind a partition, half obscured from view, a man sitting alone in the corner slowly looked up from his file. He didn't react dramatically, he didn't stand, but his eyes locked onto the space where that voice had come from, and a memory older than the rank on his chest stirred awake like a switch being flipped in a blackout. The general admissions line was longer, but Evelyn didn't seem to mind. She stood with quiet composure, hands folded in front of her, her expression unreadable. The murmur of the waiting area returned, but in a different key now, quieter, less casual. Not because of what she had done, but because of what she hadn't. A middle-aged woman a few spots behind leaned in toward another, speaking just loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "You see that?" Just walked right up like she belonged. That's the problem with these people. Think buying a surplus jacket makes them veterans. The other woman chuckled softly, then whispered something that made them both smile, though neither looked Evelyn in the eye. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her posture didn't change. She simply took one small step forward as the line inched ahead. Near the front, a young man in running gear with an Army PT logo on his sleeve looked back over his shoulder. He scanned Evelyn from head to toe, the standard issue boots, the faded cap, the expressionless face, and frowned. He turned back and said, under his breath, probably some ex-admin trying to skip ahead. Someone else muttered, "I saw a guy like that last month. Claimed he was special forces. Turned out he was logistics." Evelyn heard it all. She had learned long ago to sort sounds by threat level. Gossip didn't register. Insults didn't rattle. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was calibration. From his seat behind the partition, Brigadier General Mason Kavanaugh closed the folder in his lap without reading the last line. His brow furrowed. He didn't stand. Not yet. But his hand drifted down to rest on his knee, slow, steady, remembering something. Because voices fade, but command cadence stays buried in the bones, and Evelyn's voice had hit something, just a few words, but enough. Kavanaugh leaned forward, peering toward the hallway leading to general admissions. All he could see was her back, straight, square, familiar in a way that made the hospital room vanish, replaced by a tent in Kandahar, a cracked radio, and a voice saying, "Shift fire and brake left. Now." Back in the present, Evelyn's phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, the clinic's auto-reminder for her appointment. The time passed. The line moved. No one offered help. No one asked questions. Only the nurse from earlier gave her a brief apologetic look, then disappeared behind a curtain. And Evelyn waited. Not because she had nowhere else to be, but because walking away would mean they were right. So she stayed, silent, still, and entirely in control. When Evelyn finally reached the front desk, the clerk barely looked up. A young woman in her late 20s with a laminated badge and a Bluetooth earpiece, she tapped on her keyboard while speaking into her headset. "Name?" she asked, eyes still fixed on the screen. "Evelyn Rhodes," she replied. 10:45 appointment, orthopedics. The clerk typed, waited. The screen blinked. She frowned, typed again. "I'm not finding anything under that name." Evelyn reached into her pocket, unfolded the printed confirmation email, and slid it across the counter. The woman glanced at it, scanned the QR code, and waited for the system to respond. Nothing. Who scheduled this? The online portal. Through the VA. Another pause. "Well," the clerk said, her tone changing, "this confirmation isn't syncing with our database. Did you bring your updated credentials?" "I brought my VA ID, Evelyn said, showing her older-style card again. The woman squinted at it. "This is the legacy format. We use the new CAC-linked verification system now. Has this been updated in the last 5 years?" "No," Evelyn said calmly. "I retired in 2012. It hasn't needed updating until now." The woman set the card down and folded her hands. "Then unfortunately, we can't verify your eligibility for this time slot without a current ID in the system." "I made the appointment," Evelyn said. Her voice remained steady. "I have the confirmation. That should mean I'm in your system." "It should," the clerk agreed, then added, "but it doesn't." Another nurse behind the desk, older and clearly listening in, leaned over. "Some people have been making fake confirmations lately," she murmured. We had someone use a doctored email to jump the triage line last week. Evelyn didn't blink. She didn't bristle. Instead, she quietly gathered the paper and her card and stepped aside from the window. No protest, no anger, just the weight of another assumption added to the ones already stacked on her shoulders. Evelyn took a seat along the far wall of the waiting area, her back to the laminated posters about joint care and sleep hygiene. The chair creaked beneath her as she adjusted her posture to favor her right shoulder, the one that hadn't stopped hurting since winter. Around her, people watched without watching. A man in his 30s leaned toward his wife 2 seats down. "Did you hear?" he whispered. She brought a printed email and an old card. Thought she could skip the line. The woman glanced over briefly. "It's always the same. Show up with a story and expect everyone to salute." Evelyn folded the email in half again and tucked it back into her jacket. Her expression remained unreadable, but the silence around her was louder now. The room wasn't just skeptical, it had turned suspicious. Another staffer walked past with a clipboard, slowed as she passed Evelyn, then glanced at her name tag again. Her eyes narrowed, then quickly moved on. It wasn't hostility, it was erasure, a subtle, practiced disbelief, like she wasn't even there. Across the lobby, Corporal Vallon, the same young soldier who had blocked her at the priority line, walked through holding a tablet. He glanced in her direction and stopped. For a moment, he considered walking over. Then he didn't. He turned and kept walking. Brigadier General Mason Cavanaugh, still seated quietly beyond the partition, saw the movement, saw Evelyn's shoulders, saw the way she didn't lean back, didn't sag, didn't fold into herself. That voice, he was sure of it now, but he waited, because some moments require silence to ripen fully, and some reckonings must be earned. Somewhere near the vending machines, a private in workout gear pulled out his phone. He had seen the interaction at the priority desk earlier, had caught the way the older woman had stepped back in silence. He hadn't heard the full exchange, but it was enough for a story, enough for content. He angled the camera casually from his seat and zoomed in. Evelyn sat across the room unmoving, eyes forward, hands resting on her lap. The caption came quickly, typed with a smirk, another fake vet trying to cut lines. She really brought a printout and vibes. He added a laughing emoji, then posted it to a closed group chat for enlisted hospital staff and nearby ROTC cadets. The post took 30 seconds to upload. It took less than 5 minutes to catch fire. Screens lit up across the waiting area. Phones vibrated. Someone chuckled. Someone else turned to glance at Evelyn, now with the permission of a shared joke. "She really thinks no one can tell?" one message read. "Old patch, old boots and no cack, please." A medic scrolling between rounds snorted and whispered to his colleague, "Someone tell her cosplay doesn't get you triage." The laughter stayed low, but it grew in volume, like smoke under a closed door. Evelyn, as always, remained still. A young woman across from her watched the screen of the man beside her and frowned slightly. "That's not funny," she said under her breath. But the man only shrugged. "She's not saying anything. She knows what she's doing." Behind the partition, General Cavanaugh sat straighter now. He wasn't watching a video. He was watching a pattern, one he'd seen before, and one he never thought he'd see again, at home. By the time the video had made its third lap around the hospital's internal group chats, the tone had shifted from amusement to something sharper. The comments weren't just jokes anymore, they were assumptions dressed as facts. "Seen her type before," one message read. "Shows up once a year with a story and a badge from the 90s. Probably served in admin and tells people she was in combat." Another chimed in, "Someone should ask her who her commanding officer was." A third added, "Bet she stumbles." The image of Evelyn sitting silently had been screenshotted and turned into a meme now, complete with a sarcastic caption, "When your stolen valor plan hits a system update." In the back hallway, two junior medics scrolled through their phones between patient rotations. "Man, they're roasting that poor lady," one said, trying not to laugh. The other shrugged. "If she didn't do anything wrong, why isn't she saying anything?" Guilt's loud even when it's silent. Near the entrance, a group of visiting cadets from the academy were now talking openly about it. "That's why they tell us not to trust unsourced service claims," one said. "This stuff is everywhere now." A nurse behind the counter leaned toward the clerk at reception. "Should we call someone from security, just in case she makes a scene?" "No need," the clerk replied, tapping away. "She's not doing anything, just sitting there." And that was the point. She was just sitting there, but that somehow was becoming unacceptable. Evelyn's presence had become a contradiction. Too calm to be innocent, too composed to be afraid, too silent to be believed. Behind the partition, General Kavanaugh rubbed his thumb against the edge of his wedding band. His heart rate hadn't changed, but his breath had. He stood up slowly, then started walking toward the front. A new clerk arrived at the check-in desk, a young man with a clipboard and a badge that read Admin Verification Unit. He spoke quickly with the receptionist, glancing occasionally toward Evelyn without trying to hide it. She watched from her chair, quietly, as they huddled behind the monitor. After a moment, the man walked over. "Ma'am," he said, tone measured, "can I see your appointment confirmation again?" Evelyn nodded, unfolded the printout from her jacket pocket, and handed it to him without a word. He looked it over, turned it sideways, then pulled out a tablet and tapped a few times. "I'm not seeing this reflected in our internal database," he said. "Do you remember who booked this for you?" "I did," she said, "online, through the VA portal." He nodded, though the motion lacked conviction. "We've had some recent incidents. Fake confirmation pages, spoofed QR codes. It's become a problem." Evelyn remained still. "This looks legit," he added, "but without a synced entry in our scheduling system, I can't verify the slot. And without updated ID, there's no override path. Not for priority access." "I didn't ask for priority," Evelyn replied, voice even. "I asked for the appointment I scheduled." The clerk hesitated. "Unfortunately, until we can get verification, I can't assign you a room or mark you as present. I'm going to recommend you rebook through the front desk. Outside admissions." She nodded once. Understood. As he walked away, two nearby patients who had overheard the exchange shared a smirk. One whispered, "That's the long game. Build a fake record and hope no one checks." Evelyn didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed ahead, unblinking. But something in the atmosphere shifted again, subtle, like a change in barometric pressure. Someone had noticed the pattern, and somewhere nearby, a memory was sharpening into focus. One of the nurses behind the main desk stepped forward this time. She wasn't young, probably in her late 40s, but her eyes carried the weariness of someone who had spent years in triage. She looked at Evelyn, then at the printout still folded in her lap. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I think it's best if you wait outside the priority care zone. There's been some confusion, and until we sort this out, it's making the other patients uncomfortable." "Because I'm sitting here?" Evelyn asked, not with anger, just curiosity. The nurse hesitated. "It's the situation, not you personally." Of course it wasn't personal. It never was. Evelyn stood slowly, letting her legs do the talking. No stiffness, no hesitation, just a movement born of repetition and readiness. She tucked the paper into her jacket again and turned toward the exit. That's when someone finally spoke. "Wait." The voice didn't come from the desk. It came from a row of chairs further down the wall. A young woman, early 30s, dark hair in a regulation bun, stood up. She wore civilian clothes, but her posture screamed training. "I've been sitting here for half an hour," the woman said, eyes locked on the nurse. "That lady hasn't moved. Hasn't said a word, and somehow she's the one causing discomfort? The nurse blinked. She's being respectful. Meanwhile, the rest of us are acting like she's a threat because she doesn't explain herself every 5 seconds. Nobody answered. The woman turned to Evelyn. You shouldn't have to leave. Evelyn didn't smile, but her eyes acknowledged the moment. The woman didn't ask questions, didn't demand proof, just recognized something quiet that didn't need announcing. Still, Evelyn stepped out because silence had always been her sharpest weapon. And somewhere, beyond the layers of noise, someone was finally starting to hear it. Evelyn had just stepped past the waiting room threshold when she heard it. That line is for actual soldiers, not theater actresses. The voice was loud, sharp, and dripping with disdain. A woman stood near the hydration station in a crisp blouse and base pass lanyard. Her hair was pinned too tightly, her posture brimming with the kind of entitlement reserved for those who wore proximity like it was participation. Evelyn didn't react, but the woman wasn't finished. I've seen this happen more and more, she continued, turning now so others could hear. Someone walks in wearing a patch from a war no one remembers and expects a standing ovation. Meanwhile, real families, like mine, wait in line. She motioned toward a soldier seated nearby, a young man in uniform with a brace on his leg, staring straight ahead, silent. Her tone turned theatrical. You served in Kandahar, ma'am? Great. So did 100,000 others. But you think that gives you the right to cut past injured active duty personnel? That's not service, it's selfish. A few people turned to look at Evelyn, some curious, some uncomfortable. Evelyn stood still, not 10 feet from the speaker. She didn't apologize, she didn't defend, she simply looked at the woman once, level and wordless, before turning her eyes forward again. The woman scoffed. Of course you're silent, that's what you people do, hide behind uniforms and pity. Laura, a man nearby, muttered. That's enough. No, she snapped, it's not. Someone has to say it. Behind her, from deeper in the clinic, Mason Cavanaugh was already standing, and this time he wasn't watching, he was walking. The sound of polished shoes on tile echoed louder than it should have. One deliberate step after another, steady, without urgency, but with weight. People turned. Conversations halted, phones slowly lowered. Brigadier General Mason Cavanaugh didn't wear his rank on his clothes that day, but every inch of him radiated command. His presence didn't announce itself, it imposed itself, and as he approached, the woman who had been berating Evelyn faltered mid-rant. Ma'am, he said, voice firm but calm, I believe you've said quite enough. She turned toward him, confused for a moment. Excuse me? I'm just pointing out. I know what you're doing, he cut in, still walking, and it's beneath both this facility and your husband's uniform. The room went silent. Cavanaugh passed Evelyn without pausing and turned to face the crowd. For those of you interested, he said, now projecting his voice across the entire waiting area, this woman, Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes, served 24 years in active combat roles, including leading an emergency evacuation unit in Operation Red Basin. She didn't skip the line, she earned every damn inch of it. Gasps followed. One of the medics standing near the door lowered his eyes. The cadets froze. Someone actually dropped a pen. Evelyn blinked slowly, the first flicker of emotion crossing her face, surprise not from being defended, but from being recognized. She's the reason I came back from Kandahar in one piece, Cavanaugh continued, now addressing the nurse station, and if this clinic has even a shred of institutional memory, it'll act accordingly. Then he turned to Evelyn and said, not quietly but with deep respect, welcome back, Sergeant Major. You should have never been left standing. The woman who had insulted her shrank back without another word. The crowd parted, and for the first time that morning, Evelyn Rhodes took a step forward, this time not alone, The silence that followed Kavanaugh's declaration wasn't the awkward kind, it was reverent, heavy. The kind of pause that marked a shift in the room's gravity, a shift in who held authority and why. Evelyn stood still. Her eyes met Kavanaugh's for a long, unreadable moment. He didn't smile, neither did she. But something passed between them, an old recognition, worn and scarred but intact. Then she nodded, once, and stepped forward. The nurse who had earlier suggested she wait outside now opened the velvet divider without hesitation. Evelyn walked through it slowly, deliberately, the crowd parting with unspoken respect. Inside the priority zone, a medic scrambled to reopen a file. A chair was cleared. Her name was entered back into the system, this time by someone who didn't ask to see her ID twice. But Evelyn didn't sit down. She stood facing Kavanaugh, who had followed just behind. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice low. "Yes," he replied, "I did, and I should have done it years ago." That caught her off guard. She tilted her head slightly. "You remember, I never forgot." Behind them, people resumed their seats, but the room didn't return to normal. They watched from a distance now, not just out of curiosity, but awareness. No one looked at Evelyn like a fraud anymore. They looked at her like a question they hadn't thought to ask. Kavanaugh leaned in slightly. They wiped Red Basin from the record. No citations, no transcripts. "I got promoted, you got classified. That's how it works, doesn't it?" Evelyn exhaled through her nose. "I never expected recognition. You deserved it anyway." The receptionist brought over a clipboard with a fresh intake form. Evelyn took it without comment, but as she turned to fill it out, Kavanaugh added something else, something quieter. "They told me not to name you in the report," he said. "Said it was above my clearance. I thought I was protecting you." She looked at him then, not angry, just tired. "You weren't," she said, "but you're doing it now." And with that, she finally sat down. Kavanaugh remained standing for a moment, as if unsure whether to speak again. Then he slowly lowered himself into the chair beside her. "They asked me to forget your voice," he said. "Voice lower now, but I couldn't. Not after that night." Evelyn looked straight ahead, hands folded over the clipboard. "I was the only one still on comms," she said. "They jammed the rest. Your unit was cut off. I had to choose, radio in air support and risk civilian crossfire, or extract manually with no backup. You saved 23 people," Kavanaugh said quietly, "and you lost 6 of your own." She closed her eyes briefly. 7. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the hum of fluorescent lights and distant murmur of other patients. "They buried the operation," he said. "Said if word got out we crossed the border during blackout protocol, it could ignite something bigger." "I signed the same NDA you did," Evelyn said. "But I wasn't decorated, I was edited." Kavanaugh nodded. "You became a ghost so the rest of us could wear medals." Evelyn gave a dry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You wore them better than I would have." "No," he said, "I wore them because you let me walk out." Her eyes met his. "You didn't freeze," he said, "not once. And your voice, when everything else fell apart, it kept us moving." "I've kept that voice quiet ever since," she murmured. Kavanaugh leaned forward. "Maybe it's time someone else heard it again." For a moment, the years between them disappeared. Rank didn't matter. Recognition didn't matter. There were only 2 soldiers sitting shoulder to shoulder in a civilian world that had forgotten the cost of silence, and Evelyn finally was no longer alone in it. Later that day, after Evelyn's evaluation, she found herself in the officers' lounge, an empty, quiet room with black leather chairs and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. Kavanaugh stood near the window, staring out at the tarmac where a medevac helicopter idled in the distance. She entered without knocking. He turned slightly, then gestured to the chair across from him. "They called me the day after Red Basin," he said, without preamble. "Said the official report would list the battalion as self-extracted under fire, no names. Said it was a matter of strategic discretion. Evelyn didn't answer. He continued, I pushed back, not hard enough, and I didn't put your name in the citation recommendation because they told me it would complicate approval. That sounds about right, she said flatly. I've written that letter in my head 1,000 times, he said. The one I should have sent to the board, the one I should have sent to you. You were a captain, she replied. They dangled a star in front of you. It's not hard to guess what you did. I made it, he said, to Brigadier, but not because of what I did in the field, because I knew when to shut up. He turned to face her fully now, and you didn't. She smiled, just slightly. That was always our difference. I buried your record, he said, voice nearly a whisper, because I thought I was protecting you from political fallout, and instead I erased you. Evelyn sat back, crossing one leg over the other. You didn't erase me. You just proved that ghosts don't need medals to haunt the living. He exhaled sharply, not quite a laugh, not quite a breath of relief. Outside, the chopper lifted into the grey afternoon, and the sound of its rotors cut through the silence like a reminder. The war never really ended. It just got quieter. Until now. Kavanaugh pulled a worn leather notebook from his inner coat pocket. He flipped it open to a page filled with neatly handwritten lines, ink slightly smudged, corners dog-eared. I've kept this since that night, he said. My original after-action notes, unofficial, untouched. He handed it to her. Evelyn took it without speaking. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, unit movements, call-outs, timestamps. Then, under a scribbled heading, Vox Rhodes, she saw the fragments of her own voice transcribed in shorthand. Bravo, pivot west. 30 seconds, incoming mortar. Do not fire unless fired upon civilians across the ridge. We move when I say move. She closed the notebook and handed it back. I'm submitting this to the Joint Records Board, Kavanaugh said, and to the Pentagon. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. You're risking your clearance. I'm long past caring, he said. They can strip my stars if they want, but they won't. They know what this is. A correction. She studied him for a long moment. Why now? Because I watched a room full of soldiers and staff treat you like a fraud today, he said, and I did nothing for 10 years. That ends here. Evelyn stood. You want a statement from me? She asked. No, he said. I want your name on the record, in the right place this time. She nodded, then added, if I do this, it won't be quiet. He smiled, almost proud. Good. A knock sounded at the door. A nurse peeked in, hesitant. Ma'am, sir, the base press office called. Words spread. There's talk of a public commendation. The commandant's aide is asking if you'll speak. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Then I'll think about it. She looked back at Kavanaugh. But if I do, I speak in my voice, not the one they want. He nodded once. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Rhodes walked out of the room not as a question, but as the answer. 1 week later, Evelyn Rhodes returned to the same base, same corridor, same smell of disinfectant and coffee, but nothing about her entrance was the same. She wore civilian clothes again, simple, neat, unassuming. No ribbons, no rank, no military ID dangling from her neck, just a clipboard, a soft leather satchel, and the kind of walk that turned heads without asking for them. She passed through the main lobby without hesitation. The same nurse from the front desk looked up, and for a moment her fingers froze above the keyboard. Recognition flickered across her face, along with something else, regret. The young corporal who had blocked her at the priority line caught sight of her too. This time he didn't say a word. He stood a little straighter, eyes forward, silent. Evelyn gave him a small nod, not in bitterness, just acknowledgement. Inside the training wing, chairs were already being set in a semicircle. A sign taped to the door read, Veteran Experience and Leadership, Guest Instructor, SGM E. Rhodes Ret. Cadets filtered in slowly, Some glanced at her and then quickly looked away. A few offered awkward half smiles. One or two looked openly ashamed. She said nothing. Instead, she took her place near the center table, unpacked a notebook and waited. A medic entered and paused mid-step, the same one who had laughed at the meme last week. He swallowed hard, then found the farthest chair in the back row. 10 minutes passed. Then Brigadier General Mason Kavanaugh stepped in, not to speak, but to sit silently in the corner, as if to say, "I'm here, and I'll listen." Evelyn finally stood. No notes in hand, no slides, just her voice. But when she opened her mouth to begin, it wasn't to talk about war. It was to talk about silence. Evelyn scanned the room. Most eyes were on her now, some cautious, some curious, a few clearly unsure what to expect. She didn't blame them. They'd never been taught to expect women like her. "When I left the service," she began, "I didn't talk about it, not because I couldn't, but because silence was easier to carry than explanation." A few heads tilted. "I've heard every version of doubt you can imagine," she continued. "Too small, too quiet, too old, too clean, not enough scars, too many, no cack, no proof." The medic in the back lowered his gaze. "But silence can do two things," she said. "It can protect you, or it can erase you." She paused. "I let mine erase me, and some of you helped." No one moved. "And I don't say that in anger," she added. "I say it because if you're going to wear a uniform or care for those who did, you need to understand one thing. Service doesn't always wear a name tag." Kavanaugh leaned forward in his chair slightly, just enough for her to see him, but she didn't need to. She already knew. "Some of us were written out of the stories you read in basic," she said. "Some of us chose the shadows, and some of us were pushed into them. Either way, we still remember the heat, the loss, the radio static, the decisions that kept others alive." She folded her hands in front of her. "And we remember being forgotten." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't from discomfort. It was respect, the quiet kind, the real kind. One cadet seated near the front finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "why come back here after everything?" Evelyn looked him dead in the eye. "Because silence served its purpose. And now it's your turn to listen." The room held its breath. Evelyn let the silence linger, not to intimidate, but to let the weight of her words settle. She knew that in a world of noise, sometimes the most powerful moments came without sound. "I'm not here to be celebrated," she continued, "and I'm not here to be forgiven. I came because some of you will be in rooms like this in 20 years, and you'll remember moments like last week, where someone sat quietly in the corner and you didn't look twice." She stepped to the side of the table and gestured to the medic in the back row. "You laughed," she said, matter-of-factly, "and maybe you didn't mean harm. But I want you to remember how easy it is to join a joke, and how hard it is to stand alone in a room full of them." He sank slightly in his seat but didn't look away. "That's leadership," Evelyn added, "and it's earned in silence too." She took a breath, then said the one thing she hadn't spoken out loud since Kandahar. "I still hear their voices." Kavanaugh's eyes darkened. He knew what she meant. "I carry them with me," she said, tapping her chest. "The ones who didn't make it, and the ones who did but never spoke again." She looked around the room. "You'll meet people who served and never talk about it. You'll meet people who talk too much about things they never lived. Your job, your duty, is to know the difference without humiliating either." There was nothing left to prove, nothing more to reclaim, just a story returned to its rightful owner. As she gathered her things, the cadets stood, uncoordinated, unsure if they were supposed to. But they did it anyway, not as an order, as a choice. Evelyn paused at the door. Kavanaugh stood beside her now. He didn't say goodbye. He just nodded. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The base flags flapped high and sharp, and Evelyn Rhodes walked away not as a ghost, but as a shadow restored, cast by the truth standing tall behind her. And as Evelyn Rhodes disappeared into the sunlight, something else remained behind. a silence that no longer meant shame but respect. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't demand anything, yet she changed everything. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a veteran can carry is the truth they refuse to bury. Thank you for watching this story on Veteran Biker, where the unheard find a voice and honor never fades. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop us a comment below. What parts stayed with you the most? Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to join our growing community. Turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. We've got something special coming tomorrow. And if you want more true stories of courage, justice, and second chances, check out the next videos waiting for you on the end screen. See you there.